Alright, so we're going to unwrap this Bob character here. I'm going to start from the head and work my way down. And we're going to go through, I'm going to first unfreeze the background images, or you can just use the Layer Explorer and we'll hide the concepts. So I'm going to click on the eyeball to hide them. And we'll just focus on one piece at a time. I'm going to start with the head, so I'm going to select it, right click and isolate selection. And then we'll go into the Modify panel, and you need to make sure the Unwrap modifier is under Open Subdivision. So we can add it here and drag it down, or you can go to Editable Poly and it'll add it on top from here. So from here, I'll go into the modifier list. We'll add the Unwrap UVW modifier. And in here, there's just a couple of things we're going to look at. First of all, under Configure, we're going to do this each time. Under Configure, we're going to turn off map seams. We don't need to see the green default map seams. We're going to be creating custom peel seams. Alright, so if I turn on Edge, I'm going to select by Edges. And every time you do this, select by, you're going to have Ignore Back-Facing turned on. And I want to turn that off. That way, if I click and drag, it's going to select the edges in the background. When this is turned on, you'll notice it ignores the back-facing edges. Okay, so for what we're doing, we're going to turn that off. You can go ahead and turn on Symmetrical Geometry Selection. This is like mirror mode. So if I turn this on, as I select edges and convert them to seams, it'll copy it to the other side. So when we're analyzing how we want to unwrap our characters, you basically want to pick out the pieces like the nose and ears and the teeth, things that stick out from the character's head in this case, and we need to separate those from the face. So ultimately we want to unwrap the face so that it's flat so we can paint on it. And with Bob specifically, this bottom part of the neck might be an issue, so we're going to separate it from these edge loops down here. So I'll start by breaking off the big pieces like the ears. So if you double click from your metal edge loop, it'll select that edge loop, and then over here we've got Peel, and we can use the third button, Convert Selection to Seam. Okay, so if you go through these, the first one is Edit Seam. If that's turned on, you can click, you can hold Control or just click, and it'll add new peel seams. If you hold Alt, you can deselect. The next one's point-to-point seam, so if I click from one edge or one corner, it's just going to follow the mouse and fill in all the edges in between. So I'll hit undo on that. When you right click, it ends using this tool. And right now we're focused on Convert Edge Selection to Seam. Okay, so we already have the ears kind of chopped off, and we'll come back to those in a minute. We're going to do the mouth. When you separate the mouth, you want to make sure, depending on how you're painting your character, so if I had some detailed lipstick or something I'm painting in here, that might determine which edges you select. In this case for Bob, we might paint the inside a darker color for the mouth. So I'm just going to make sure I select the inner edge loop here. And again, I'm going to turn off any tools I have on here. Just double click to grab that whole edge loop and convert it to a seam. Okay, so that's cutting the back part of the mouth out. So for the nose, we'll just go around and select. We'll have to manually select, but we'll just hold Control and select the edge loop that follows the base of the nose, and that will cut that away from the face. So I'll convert that. And for the eyes, because we've opened the back of the eyes like this, we can just grab that back edge loop and convert it to a seam. So then when we flatten the face, it'll split it from that back edge. Okay, so like I said before, we want to separate this bottom part of the neck, this chest area. So I'm going to double click here, convert that to a seam. So the eyebrows and the teeth we'll save for last. The ears, I'm going to want to split the ears in half, so I'm going to flatten the front and the back separately. So we'll go ahead and add an edge all the way around here. Okay, so this is where you could use point-to-point seam, but I'm just selecting the edges. And you got to make sure that they meet up with the other seam that we've put in, and then convert that to a seam. Okay, so now we can flatten the front and back separately. And you can see on the back I've accidentally selected an edge. This is going to mess up the unwrap. So I'm going to turn on Edit Seams, hold Alt, and just deselect that. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is for the chest and the head, we need to have a seam down the back so this can spread open. So I'm going to turn on edges, and in this case I'll just use point-to-point seam, and starting from the back middle of the head, we'll create a seam that goes all the way down the back to the bottom. And then I'll right click, and then just to help this dome section of his head spread out better when we unwrap it, I'm going to cut in a slice right here, just a T-slice like this. This will just help this round dome shape to fan out better when we use the peel tools up here. Okay, so at this point we could start unwrapping this. I'm going to select a polygon on the face, and I'm going to use this last button here, expand polygon selection to seam. And if you've cut your seams properly, you should notice that it grows the selection out to the edges of your seams that you have in here. So from here under peel, there's tools here, quick peel, peel mode, and reset peel. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit quick peel, and then we're going to hit reset peel on most of the objects. So with the head, the face, this is the only time we're not going to use the peel option, and we're going to stick with using pelt map. So I'm going to click on the pelt map option. We're going to go into the pelt options, and we're going to select the stretcher. So the first thing you usually want to do is select the stretcher. I'm going to zoom out here. I'm going to use the scale tool in the edit UV window, and I'm going to scale that stretcher out quite a bit, almost 3 times the size. Okay, so once you've scaled that out, you can hit start pelt, and it should pull the face out like that, nice and flat. So the next thing is you have to hit commit, and then we have our face sitting here unwrapped. Okay, so that unwrapped well. You can see the hole for the nose, the mouth, the ears, and the eyes up here. We're just going to push this out of the way for now because we're going to pack these all together later. Okay, so you could keep this window open as you're working. I'll close it for now. So we'll go ahead, we'll move on to the ears. If you still have symmetry turned on, you can select a polygon on the ear like this and hit expand, and you'll notice it grabs both sides, so we can peel these open at the same time. Okay, so with the fronts selected like that, I'm going to hit quick peel. Our window pops open again, and then just hit reset peel. That'll straighten them out. And now you can keep the window open. We'll go to the back, expand the selection, and then we're just hitting quick peel and reset peel. Okay, you don't have to worry about moving them around. We're going to pack it all together later. Okay, so we've got the face, we've got the ears. I'll select the nose. We'll expand that, do a quick peel and a reset. If you want to move it over just to make sure it flattened out properly, it should look like this. So we'll have to remember to do the neck. So I'm going to expand that, hit quick peel and reset peel. You'll see that in here. So there's inside the mouth back here. I'm going to expand that, do the same thing, quick peel and reset. And then that's pretty much everything except for the teeth and the eyebrows. So I'll show you a quick trick for the teeth. Over here, if you turn on polygon, you can turn on select by element, and then we'll just select the teeth on the top and the bottom, just hold control. And in your UV window, at the bottom, you'll see this icon here, display only selected polygons. If you click that, it will temporarily hide everything else. And then it's easier to get in here and create the seams for the teeth. Okay, so the teeth are actually quite simple. You can switch to edge. We basically just need to create a seam along the open border around the set of teeth. So on the top, I'm going to double click an edge. Notice it selects everything because I have element still turned on, so turn that off. And then I'll double click the edge on that side. Hold Control, double click the other side, and then we're just going to add these 3 edges at the back. Okay, so when we model the teeth, this section should be open. I still have symmetry turned on, so it picks up both sides. And then convert that to a seam and do the exact same thing on the other set. Alright, so convert to seam. Now while we're still in here, you can select a polygon on the top set, expand it, just do a quick peel and a reset, and then the same thing on the bottom. Okay, so that's pretty easy. Now to bring everything back, we need to turn this icon off. Everything will come back, and then we can do the same thing with the eyebrows. So we'll turn on element again. So select them both like this, hit that button again, and then this time we're just going to create a seam down the back here. So turn off element, select your bottom edges, and convert them to a seam. So we'll have to go up 1 edge at least, and if you want you can go up on both edges here. So I'll select the front and the back edge just to give it more room for this shape to unwrap. And then I'll select these again. We'll do a quick peel and a reset, and then that's it. And then you can see the shape like this. Okay, so in this case we're probably just going to be painting these a flat color. So this will be fine. Alright, so I'm going to turn off display only selected. This brings everything back. And at this point we should have unwrapped every piece of the face so far. So in your UV window you can select all the polygons in here, and we're going to pack these together using the tools down here. So under Arrange Elements, we're going to use, you can see in here, Pack Custom, Rescale Elements, Pack Together, Pack Normalize. So we want to pack normalize because this is going to take each one of these UV sets and scale it down to the relative size so that each piece is scaled the same way. And so if we paint across the nose or any section of the mesh in another program, that texture is going to scale equally across the entire surface. So for padding, you can go ahead and knock that down to 0.01 to pack it together tighter. You can turn on rotate, it'll just rotate the clusters to fit them in this space better, and then just hit pack normalize. Okay, so I'm going to expand this and you'll see how it's fit everything together, and everything is scaled together. So if you wanted to, you could take the element, you can turn on element, and now you can select each of these as their own element. You can take the element for the face, and if you wanted to, you don't have to, but you can rotate this around so it's facing straight up and down. This way it's more recognizable if you do take this into Photoshop to paint on it. If you do this, you're going to have to move some of these other elements around. Alright, so I'm going to just space these out a bit. Just make sure they don't overlap and they don't go outside of the border here. But we do have a lot of extra space that we can use. So I'm just going to shift things around. And again, you can rotate things, just make sure everything fits in here. But do not scale anything at this point. Okay, so this big chunk here is the nose. Alright, so I've pushed these things around, everything fits in here. Okay, so this section here needs to get moved over. Let's make sure nothing's overlapping. And then this will be ready for painting. So in Mudbox we could just paint on the face and everything should work out nice and seamlessly. If we go into programs like Substance Painter, we have all these different UV sets now that we could paint on, and we can actually mask these UV sets out. So that's something to keep in mind as we're moving forward, but I'll do a custom video showing that later. Okay, so for now, this is all unwrapped properly. I'm going to close that window. Okay, so the head is unwrapped. We can right click and end isolate, and then we can go ahead and do the rest. We'll do the hair because the hair is easy, and then we'll go down and do the body, the hands, pants, and the feet. So before I do, let's make sure we save the file, and then we can move on. So next we'll focus on the shirt. So I'll just grab the shirt, right click and isolate. Alright, so we'll go in and add our Unwrap UVW modifier on top of editable poly. And we'll do the same routine where we turn off map seams, turn on edge, turn off ignore back facing, and turn on symmetry. Okay, so this one, especially for your own characters, you're gonna have to decide how you want to unwrap or break parts off of the body. So it totally depends on the style of shirt that you've modeled or the body of your character and which areas you want to texture differently. Okay, so I know that with Bob I would just be painting his shirt as one color pretty much, maybe put a logo here or something. So it won't matter too much how I separate things like the arms and the body. I could cut the body in half from front to back, including the arms, but in this case we'll separate the arms to make it easier. So I'm going to go in here, double click the edge loop around the middle of the arm at the shoulder. We'll convert that to a seam. So I'm going to unwrap the arms separately like this, but to peel these open we'll have to have a seam hidden underneath. So you can use point-to-point seam if you want. We'll go from here and we'll end up here so that it meets up, and then we'll be able to flatten that out. So the only other thing really now is we need to separate the front and the back of the shirt and then separate the collar. So the front and back of the shirt will be fairly easy. We'll turn off point-to-point seam, and underneath here we just have to double click this edge loop, convert that to a seam, and then following the same edge loop up here we'll double click, but we have to go in and deselect a few things. So I'm going to hold Alt and deselect everything off the shirt here up until the shoulder, and then we need to deselect everything that's connected to the collar. Okay, so I'm hold Alt and deselect. You can hit Alt X to put it in see-through mode. Just deselect every little piece that's attached to the collar. This should end when the edge loop gets up to the top where the shirt meets the collar. Alright, so if you do that, you can convert that to a seam. Now the next thing is we want to separate the collar. The easiest way to unwrap this collar, because it's thick and it has geometry on the front and back, is we're just going to separate the collar from the shirt. So we could start by, on the inside edge, just double click your last edge in here. We'll convert that to a seam, and then we'll continue this down the edge out here. So we'll just select the edges. I'll select this edge here, continuing down, and I'll continue selecting the edges until I can get to the end or the point of the collar here. Okay, so I'm looking to get down to here. And then I'm going to go back up the other side as well. But first of all, let's convert that to an edge, or a seam I should say. And then we'll go around the inside edge as well to try to separate the top and the bottom. Okay, so let's start by, you can try double clicking to grab the edge loop around the back like this, but we'll have to add, actually that grabs the whole thing, so we'll convert that to a seam. And let's just see what we have so far. If you grab a polygon and hit expand, you can see what you're looking at. So this is the top of the collar, which I want to flatten out, but then we have the bottom of the collar as well. And if I expand, you can see it leaks into the body. So this means I'm missing a seam on the inside up at the top here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grab that. If you double click the edge loop, it should bring you around to the front here. Okay, and that should connect up with these other seams that we've created. Might be hard to see. If you hit Alt X, you can see through. So I'll convert that to a seam, and then you can go ahead and try to select the polygons on the bottom of the collar again. So if you select one and hit expand, you can see it now ends at the seam that we created in there. Alright, so you can go ahead while it's selected and we can just do our quick peel and reset, and then keep the windows open. We'll select the outside part of the collar. Let's do a quick peel and a reset. And that's pretty much the tough part done. So we'll grab the front, expand, quick peel, reset. Same thing on the back. And then we'll do the arms. So once you get used to this, you can unwrap things pretty quickly. It's really just problem solving, figuring out where you need to place the seams on your character to unwrap them properly for painting. Trying to take these parts and lay them out in a 2D space for a texture map. Okay, so let's grab everything here and we'll go ahead and pack this together using the same technique. So I'll turn on rotate, drop the padding down to 0.01, and then pack normalize. That keeps everything to scale. If you keep hitting this, you'll see nothing happens, but if I expand the window, we can go in here and select by element, and we can just start rotating things. So I'll go one at a time. So if I straighten these out and even move them off to the side. So I'm just straightening these out for visual reference in case, again, if I flatten these in Mudbox or if I take them into Photoshop to paint. A lot of times I'll take things into Mudbox to paint, and then I'll just kind of paint everything loosely. And if you need to fix things in Photoshop after, you can usually tell by the color that you've painted what piece belongs to what piece. Okay, so I've rotated those and I'm hitting pack normalize again, and you can see it just tries to keep everything straight this time. Okay, so this is packing everything as close together as possible, using as much space as possible. And this time everything is nice and straight. Usually that trick works. It might not always work, but in this case it worked, so we're going to leave it like that. I don't care if the back of the shirt's sideways, it's better that it fills that space. Alright, so we can close that window. You can go ahead and right click and isolate. Quickly save the file. I usually save after I unwrap each piece. And then we'll do the pants and we'll deal with the hands and feet last, and I'll show you a trick for those. Okay, so I think I said I was going to do the hair and haven't done the hair yet, so just remember we still have to do the hair. We'll do the hair last. It's easy enough. So we'll grab the pants, right click, isolate selection. Pants are super easy to do. So we'll just go in and add our unwrap. Turn off map seams, select by edge, turn off ignore back facing, and turn on symmetry. Okay, so all we have to do here is cut the pants in half. We're going to put a seam right down the side of the leg and then underneath in the middle. Okay, so simple enough. If we convert that to a seam, we can quickly grab the front of the pants and flatten it out. And then do the same thing with the back. And then you can just grab these and pack them together using the same settings, just like that. Okay, so it seems like there's wasted space in here, and there is really. If this was a game model, I'd probably unwrap everything on one texture, but this is for a short film, so we're not too concerned about that. I'd rather the pants have their own texture map, so this is perfectly fine. So we're going to close that. We're going to right click and end isolate. Then we'll jump up to the hands. Hands are also easy. We haven't attached the hands yet. We'll probably attach them when we start to rig the character. This way when we do skin the hands to the rig, we'll be able to just mirror the skin weights. It's an option, you don't have to do that. You could just skin both hands separately as well. Same with the feet. But in this case, I'm going to take one hand, we'll right click and isolate it, and then we'll go ahead and unwrap it. So the best way to unwrap the hands is to keep one edge attached and then just split them along the inside edge. So we'll add the unwrap and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Turn off map seams, select edge, turn off ignore back facing. This time I'm not turning on symmetry, but you can go ahead and double click this edge loop and you'll see how this is going to basically cut the hand in half. So you could unwrap the top and bottom and have two separate pieces, but we can also just unfold this or hinge it from over here. So if I hold Alt, and you can look from the top view, just deselect all the edges running along the pinky to the back of the hand here. We'll keep this surface attached, and then I'll convert that to a seam. And if you select the whole thing using expand selection, you can do a quick peel and then you can reset. It'll put it all back together, and that's what your hand will look like. If you want to, you can rotate it so it's up and down, doesn't matter. There's also rotation tools up here, so there is a quick transform section. You can go through and see what this does, but you can rotate things around. It wasn't straight to begin with, so I have to straighten it out. And just something like that is fine. Just make sure none of the fingertips go over the borders. So you can close this window and we can get out of here. This is now unwrapped. If you right click and end isolate, you can actually just take your other hand, and if you want to delete it, you can just copy this over again. So we'll go ahead and mirror the hand again, making it a copy, and then click OK, and then you'll see this one's already unwrapped. So even later, if you took this model out and you painted this hand, if we go to Mudbox and use symmetry, it's going to paint them both anyways, but if you just painted one hand, you could always mirror it and replace that one. You'd have to do that before the rigging though. Okay, so we can do the same thing with the feet. I'll take this one, right click, isolate. Okay, so with this shoe, I'll go ahead and add the unwrap, and I'll just discuss different ways you could unwrap this. So we'll go ahead and turn off map seams, switch to edge, turn off ignore back facing, no symmetry again. So underneath here we've got kind of the sole of the shoe, we've got the heel back here. If I wanted to put completely different materials or textures on here in, say, Substance Painter, I would have had to add another edge through here, but then I could unwrap the bottom separately and then have the top separate. So I could put like a suede or a different leather material on the top of the shoe, but then have something completely different on the bottom, like a hard rubber or a plastic or something. In this case though, we're just going to be painting this pretty much all the same thing. Even the way we've unwrapped, or we've modeled it right now, we can still unwrap this all as one piece, and we could still mask out different parts using different methods. But something to keep in mind moving forward is that when you model the parts for your character or any object, when you're adding edges, think about how you're going to unwrap it later as well. Okay, so for this case, we're going to keep it really simple again. We'll double click and this will create an edge loop all the way around. So I could split this right in half and just do it that way. So I'll have half of the shoe here and here. But I could also just separate the bottom and try to flatten the top out. But we'll just do it this way. We'll keep it simple for now. It's just something to keep in mind as you're moving forward. So I'll convert that to a seam. Then we can just quickly grab this half here. We'll do a quick peel and a reset. Same thing on that side. And then you can pack those together. Okay, so I'm going to switch all these options again, pack together like that, and that's it. Okay, so this is fine. The only issue is we have a seam down the middle now. So if we had something like a normal map or any kind of bump map on here, that's the only time that might be an issue. So again, just keep that in mind when you're unwrapping things. Okay, so for this is fine. I'll right click and isolate, You can delete this one and we'll replace it with a mirror copy. So I've hit a line by accident. So mirror, copy, click OK, and then that's that. Okay, so everything here is unwrapped except for the hair, and we're not going to unwrap the glasses. We're just going to put a material on them in here, but let's grab the hair, right click, isolate, and go down to editable poly. So I'll just point out that if you have any other modifiers on here, like the shell modifier, if the shell modifier is still in here, just right click and collapse it to and bake it into editable poly at this point. Because if you have the shell modifier on here making your hair thick still, we need to make sure to bake that down so that we're unwrapping the geometry from here. Alright, so hopefully that makes sense. It did come up as a question in our last meeting. All I'm going to do here is double click the inner edges just to try to hide the seam for the hair. And sorry, we need to add the unwrap first. So I'm adding the unwrap, turning off map seams, turning off ignore back facing, selecting by edges. You can turn on symmetry for this one, and then we'll double click all the way around here. Alright, so let's convert that to a seam. I'll select the outer part of the hair, do a quick peel and reset. Same thing on the inside. Okay, and then take these two pieces and pack normalize. And then that's it. So I can right click and end isolate. That's the character unwrapped at this point. I didn't unwrap the eyes, we just texture mapped the eyes in here. If you wanted to paint customize, you'd have to unwrap those, export them with the model. But at this point we can save the file again, and then I'll show you how to export this specifically to paint in Mudbox, and I'll come back to it for Substance Painter. Okay, so for Mudbox, you should go around and you should start by turning off Open Subdivision on each part of the model. We're going to export this as the base mesh only. We don't want it to collapse or bake the subdivision in when we export it. So every single piece, we'll turn that off. And then we'll just hide what we're not exporting. So you can hide the glasses and the controllers. And then hide the eyeballs and these stretch space warps that we added. And then from here you can select the whole model, go up to File, Export, Export Selected, and then make sure you choose somewhere to save it. Okay, so I'm saving it in this folder here. We're saving just as an OBJ. So I'm going to call this Bob Unwrapped for the video. Saving it as an OBJ, I'm going to click Save. If we were going to Substance Painter, we would keep the default of none, but we're going to Mudbox, so we're using the Mudbox preset. Under Materials, just uncheck Export Material and Create Material Library. We don't need these. And then just hit Export. You should get no errors when you export from here. And then you can hit Done. And then I'll open up Mudbox, and I'll quickly show you how to set this up in Mudbox for painting. So on a new Mudbox scene, I'm going to go up to File, Import, and I'm going to find my OBJ. I'll click Open, and when it opens, you should get no errors. Alright, so hopefully there's no errors in your mesh when you open this up. When you view this in Mudbox, you'll notice that any areas that don't have polygons on the back are transparent. So you can change that just by going up to Display, and there's an option in here, Show Both Sides. So the shortcut's Shift B. If you turn that on, it'll show the back facing polygons. The first thing you need to do in Mudbox when you bring in an OBJ that has multiple pieces like this, because if you go to the object list, you'll notice each piece is in here. And this is where it's important to name things properly. This one I happened to not name things properly, so you can see things are called box, like that should be pants. So that's where back in Max I should have named things properly. But I'm going to hit Control D to deselect. And I'm just going to go ahead and start setting this up anyways. So the first thing is we brought in the low poly mesh, but remember back in Max we're going to be using open subdivision to subdivide, and our iterations are set to 2 on each open subdivision modifier. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to end up subdividing each part of the mesh twice to represent open subdivision and the 2 iterations, and then I can paint on the smooth mesh. But before you do that, there's an option you have to check. So you're going to go up to mesh and down to add new subdivision level options. You can open that up and make sure smooth UVs is turned on. Okay, it's off by default. You need to turn this on. Once you turn it on, it should stay on each time you open Mudbox, but just double check that. Click OK. And then just put your mouse over the object you're going to subdivide. So right now I'm on the hair. You can hit Shift D twice. Shift D. If you go up to mesh, you'll see add new subdivision level. The shortcut was Shift D. That's what we're using. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and just put my mouse over each part of the model. Hit Shift D twice. Do the same thing for the hands. Okay, remember the hands aren't attached, so we have to treat them as separate objects for now. Same thing with the body. So I'll do the feet. Alright, so everything's subdivided and ready to be painted at this point. So before painting, we have all these different objects. Mudbox will treat the whole thing as one object, and it's going to be using one material for each object. So if I start painting on these, even if it creates new paint layers for each object, Mudbox is applying it all to one material right now. So the first step is to go over each object in your scene. You got to right click and assign a new Mudbox material. So you can name this, just naming it hair, and then I'm going to change the color slightly just so I know that I've changed that part of the model. And then I'll do the same thing for the head. Add new material, Mudbox material, just name it head. And just change the color slightly. And I'm just going to keep moving along and doing that for each part of the mesh. Okay, so this is important that you do this to start. So it says right hand. You don't have to change the color, but I just changed the color so that I know I've already updated that material. So we just need to do the pants and then the shoes. Okay, so everything has been updated as far as the materials go. Now we can start painting. So I'm going to go into my paint tools under paintbrush. Make sure your paintbrush is selected, and then you'll see all the options for that tool over here on the right. So I'm going to change my material here, and I'm going to start with the head. So you can just choose a color for the head, and if I zoom in, I'm going to use the bracket keys to reduce the brush size, and in this case you can turn on mirror in the x-axis, and then we can paint with symmetry. So you can see the brush looks like it's on both sides now. If I paint, it's going to ask you to create a new paint layer. So we'll call this one head color. So the size, you can stick with 2048 as your texture size. So 2K is fine. You could bump it up to 4096. I wouldn't go any higher than that. Just keep in mind you can always scale textures down in size. You can't scale them up. So in this case for Bob, I'll go with 2048. Save as. Whenever we save our Mudbox file, it's going to save a backup of the textures, and I always save this at the highest bit rate for Photoshop, so 16-bit. Channel, right now we're painting in diffuse, but you can paint specular, gloss. Incandescence would be for like glowing materials or light. Opacity for transparency or see-through. Vector displacement map, we're not going to get into that with this, you don't need that one. Bump map is a regular bump map, and then you've got your normal bump, and then a reflection mask. Okay, so we're just painting in diffuse. I'm going to click OK. Once you've set that up, you should be able to just paint on the model, and it should be nice and smooth. Okay, so each time you start a new layer, it's important that you fill the layer with a base color first. If I paint like this, and then I go to save or export this texture out, so let's just export this and see what happens. So we're gonna do, this is Bob head test. Okay, so whether I save it as a PNG or JPEG or anything, we're gonna choose PNG, and I'll explain why we're doing that after, but PNG is basically going to compress the image without losing any quality. So I'm going to hit save. Now if I go back to Max and open up the material editor and I go to load that material in, right now I'm just using Scanline and the default legacy materials. But I'm going to click on here and load that as a bitmap. Notice how the background is black and only the painted areas show up right now. And if I throw this onto the character's head, you'll see that when I render, the background is transparent. There's no color. Okay, so it treats the background as transparent. In some cases, it'll actually render black. So you need to make sure you fill the background layer before you start painting. So the first thing I'll do on each layer is I'll pick the neutral background color and I'll hit flood paint layer. That floods the whole thing and gives you a base to start with. Now if you wanted to, you could add different layers on top of this. So if I add a new layer up here, just call this Bob face. This way you always have your base color at the bottom and then you have layers on top. This is a non-destructive workflow if you do it this way. So now let's just say I have details on here like face paint or something, and I just decide I'm going to start painting his face with different colors. Right now if I go and erase this, okay, so you'll see right now this tool has steady stroke turned on. I'm going to turn that off. So if I erase it, it just shows the layer underneath, so no problem. So I'll hide that for a minute, but if I went here and started erasing, it's going to erase my base paint underneath. So it's a good idea to start using layers so that you can erase things without destroying the base coat underneath. Okay, so I'm actually going to rename this. So just double click, I'll call this teeth, and I'll go in and start painting the teeth separately. So I'm going to use my paintbrush. I'll choose a color for the teeth, make the brush a bit smaller. So I could go in here and try to paint the teeth like this, but it's going to be difficult to get the entire surface. This is where you want to flatten your UVs out to paint on. If you go to UV view, you can see the UVs here, but you can't paint on them. So you can see the teeth. I've started painting on them up here. So in 3D view, put your mouse over the head, hit Alt T. That's the shortcut to flatten it into UV space like this. Okay, so now I can't use symmetry, so I'm going to turn symmetry off for now, but I can quickly go in here and just fill these in. Okay, so I'll just quickly run the brush over the edges here. Okay, so while I'm in here, I'll paint the eyebrows. I know I named the layer teeth only, but I'm going to change the color to the eyebrows. If I can't remember which UV set the eyebrows are, I'd go back to the 3D view and just put a bit of paint on them so I could see it. But I remember this shape from the way we unwrapped it. So I'll just quickly paint these out. And then you can hit Alt T to go back. And when you go up here, it might be blue. It's just loading the texture back in. And then if it looks faded like this, it's because this part of the model is selected. I'm going to hit Control D, just completely deselect it, and then you'll see the color. Another quick tip, if you're trying to pick colors off of your model, so let's say I need to get that skin color back. If I click on the color here, it should save swatches as you create them up here. But I could also use the eyedropper tool. But because of the way it's shading in the viewport, I might get different tones as I'm trying to pick that color. So you can go to Display, and you can switch to flat lighting, or you can hit Shift L. That'll flatten it out to this toon shading style, and then you just get flat colors that you can pick off of here. Okay, so I'll go back, just hit Shift L, turns the lights back on. But if I wanted to, I could make sure I have that same skin color selected and go into the paintbrush. So make sure your paintbrush is selected first, then change your color. And then in this case, I should be able to use symmetry in the x-axis, and then I could start painting the hands. So I'll have to create a separate paint layer for each hand though. So I'm going to go ahead and call this hand R for right, and then I'll set one up for that side as well. This is the left hand. So they both have a layer on them now. If I start painting over here, it'll show up on the other one as well. Okay, so again, you can go in and you can flood the paint layer. Just make sure you click on the hand that you're painting on and flood the paint layer. Symmetry won't work for this. Okay, so if I'm over here painting on this one, you should be able to flood the paint layer. For some reason it won't let me, so I'll just try and select it in the list here. And again, this is where it's important that you select or you name things before you bring things in. You can also use select and move. So I could select the object like this. If you're having any kind of troubles with this, you could turn off symmetry as well. So if I turn off mirror mode, just select that hand, go back to my paint tool from here, and I should be able to flood the paint layer from here. And then I can hit Control D. Okay, so it's just workarounds when you're running into bugs and glitches like that. Alright, so the hair I didn't paint either. We might as well set that up. And click on it to create a layer. Just call it hair. And I'll click on the paintbrush, and I'll quickly change the color to the same color I used on the eyebrows, and then I'll just flood the layer. Okay, so if I wanted to paint different detail on here, like curls or something, I could go in and do that, or hair strokes. So I'll just quickly do the shirt, the pants, and the shoes, and I'll do a quick review of the projection brush on the shirt, and then we'll bring everything into max just to make sure it's all working. Okay, so for the shirt, I'll pretty much keep the shirt white, and if I start painting, I can name it shirt, and then I'll flood the paint layer, and then we'll just quickly do the pants as well. I'll just choose like a blue. And then I'll have to create a layer for each shoe. So there's shoe right. And then we'll do shoe left. Okay, so the last thing I'll do, I'm not going to paint too much detail on this. If you wanted to, you could go in and add shading and stuff like that. There's even dodge and burn tools in here like Photoshop, so you could go in and darken or lighten areas and add highlights and stuff like that. If you really wanted to, you could start a new layer in each channel for the bump. So if I went up to, let's just say I'm painting on the shirt and it's going to be like a sweater material or something. I don't have a good example of a texture in here, but if I go to create a new layer, on that new layer I could call it shirt bump and then change the channel I'm painting into the bump. Okay, so just a regular bump map. If I click OK, then I can use the paintbrush with any color. For bump maps, you're pretty much using black or white. And in this case, I'm just going to set it to a neutral gray, but I'm going to use a stencil down here just to show as an example. Okay, so I could load in a sweater texture, but I'll just use maybe these scales. Okay, so if this is a tileable texture, you could turn on use tiles. This is not a tileable texture, so I can see in that mesh or in the image there that it has a pattern. Okay, so this noise tile's fine. I can scale this up or down. But then if I use the paintbrush and start painting on here, it's creating that pattern. And that is just a bump map. So I can hit undo. In your paintbrush, you can change the fall off. If you go to the fall off here, I have this one set to a hard edge. So when I paint, the edges are hard. You can change this back to the default, which is, I believe, this bottom left one. Any of these curved ones here will work. That'll give you a fall off towards the outside of the brush. Okay, so I can use if I change the color here to black, you can see how black is negative, so it's painting negative space in the bump map, it's pushing it in. If I switch it to white, that would be positive space, pulling the bump map out away from the mesh. Okay, so you can leave this at whatever color. If you want to make sure it's raised off the surface, set it to white. If it's going into the surface, set it to black. And then you can just adjust the strength here. Okay, so you'd have to probably turn this right down to something low like 0.5 to get a gradual bump map like that. So you can turn on the symmetry as well for in the x-axis, and I might bump that down to something smaller like 0.2. And I'm just going to quickly throw something on here so that I can bring it back to max and show you how this would work. Okay, so I'll just put something down here like this. Okay, so this is where you might see problems in the seam, is when you're using a bump map. But because we pack or use pack normalize, you shouldn't see any issues in here, because there's the scaling between the front of the mesh and the arms should be the same at this point. Alright, so let's go ahead and I'll select that stencil and just turn it off. Okay, so I'm just doing this as an example. What I'll do now is I'll use the projection brush just to show how that works again. And again, you can add another layer. This is going to be a paint layer for the diffuse. And I'll just call this logo. Click OK. So I already have a Spider-Man image in here, but you could, any image that you have with transparency, you could use as a stencil in here. So I just want to project that Spider-Man image on the front of his shirt. So if I use projection, you always want to make sure your color for projection is set to white. If you want the full color to transfer over. If I change this to any other color, it's going to change the tint. So if I click on the Spider-Man right now, I'll just quickly do this. So actually, let's click on the Spider-Man logo and turn off use tiles, and then I'll just line this up in the front view, and we'll scale it down. And we'll just line it up something like this. Okay, so I've changed the projection color to blue. And you can see what that does there. It changes the saturation, the tint of the color. So I'm going to hit undo on that. I'm going to click on my projection brush, switch the color of the brush to white, and click done. And in this case, I'll turn off mirror, and we'll just project that image right onto the shirt. In some cases, this is where you'd want to change your fall off to the square brush, just to make sure you're getting a hard edge on there. But then that's pretty much it. So if I go back to my stencils here, I can turn off the Spider-Man head, and then that's it. Alright, so let's just export this, and I'll show you how it all looks back in 3ds Max, and make sure you know where to plug in all these different maps. Okay, so overall, I'd have to export every single map for each piece individually. So I'm just going to show the shirt, since it has the Spider-Man projected on it and the bump map. Okay, so if I go in here, the shirt is selected over here. So first of all, there's the diffuse section and the bump section. These are two different maps that I have to export, and diffuse has 2 layers. So you can flatten these into 1 layer when you export them from here. So I'm just going to right click and choose Export Channel Merged. Okay, so that's going to merge everything in that channel together. Alright, so I'm going to save this as Bob Spidey Shirt. And again, we're using PNGs, so the other options are TIFF, JPEG, TIFF, Targa, OpenEXR. So Targas are uncompressed and will give you the best quality. The problem with this is these files get very large. PNG is compressed, but the quality difference between a PNG and Targa is almost unnoticeable. So you want to use PNG for the smaller file size. JPEG is even smaller, but you'll notice the distortion in your image if you use a JPEG. So we're going to stick to using PNGs. I'm going to hit save. That's going to collapse these together and save out one texture map. And I'm going to also save, so I'm going to export selected this time on the bump map. And we'll do the same thing, save it as a PNG. So I'm going to call this one Spidey Shirt Bump. Hit save. And then we can jump back to Max. Okay, we're going to ignore his face for now. I'm going to create a brand new material. Should name your materials. I'll call this shirt. And I'll start by bringing in the paint for the shirt. So we've got Bob Spidey Shirt. And if I throw that onto the shirt and show it in the viewport, it should look like this. Okay, so I haven't turned on Open Subdivision yet, but this is where if I select the shirt and turn it on, you should notice that your edges on the projected logo are still nice and clean. If we did not turn on the option to smooth the UVs, when you put Turbo Smooth or Open Subdivision on in 3ds Max, it will distort the UVs, and your edges around your Spider-Man here would be all distorted probably. Okay, so we've done it properly, so it looks good. The only other thing is just adding in that bump map. Okay, so in your standard materials, you're just adding it under bump and loading in the bump map that I saved out. And you can see it if I double click and blow up the material, you can see it in here. If I go to the parent of the material, with these standard materials, if you hold your mouse button down on the show material in viewport, there's show realistic material in the viewport. So you can turn that on and you'll see your bump right away. Okay, so you might notice the bump looks strange. So I'm going to go back to Mudbox real quick, and I'm going to export this again. So I'm going to go up to export selected. This time I'll save it as a JPEG and hit save. And then I'm going to reload that as the JPEG. Okay, notice the difference here. Okay, so Mudbox saves the channels different when you choose PNG and JPEG. In most cases, I will choose JPEG for the bump maps specifically. Okay, the JPEG will work better. It's going to save the channels out properly. It's not trying to save an alpha map or anything with it. And then that will fix that real quick. Okay, so just keep that in mind. PNGs for everything else, but for your bump maps, JPEG. Okay, even if it was a normal map, I'd save it as a PNG, but specifically for bump maps coming out of Mudbox, save it as a JPEG. Okay, so now that's perfect. So if I hit Shift Q, you can see the bump in there. If I added lights, the bump would show better because there'd be shadows and stuff, but this is just the default lighting and you can still see it. Okay, so that's just a quick review of Mudbox and the whole unwrapping all together. I'm going to do a separate video showing how to bring this into Substance Painter. Okay, so for now, aside from Bob's crazy texture on his head, this is all set up for painting.